It was December 10th, 2008. The day the world learned that one of the most trusted names on Wall Street was a lie. Thousands of people woke to discover that their life savings, their retirement, their children's education funds had vanished. In a Manhattan apartment, two middle-aged men confronted their father. They were his sons, Andrew and Mark Madoff. Their father was Bernie Madoff, 70 years old, a billionaire, the former chairman of NASDAQ. For decades, he had cultivated an image of himself as a financial sage, a man with an almost magical ability to generate consistent 12% annual returns regardless of market conditions. But that December morning, his sons asked, "Are you running a Ponzi scheme?" And Bernie Madoff, after 40 years of lies, finally told the truth. "Yes, I'm running a Ponzi scheme. We're out of money." By that evening, the FBI knew. By the next day, it was on the news. Bernie Madoff hadn't just defrauded a few people. He had constructed the largest fraud in financial history. Approximately $17 to $20 billion in actual cash had vanished. Around 15,000 people discovered that their retirement, their children's education funds, their life's work had never really existed. This is the story of Bernie Madoff. It begins not with his fall, but with his rise. Bernard Lawrence Madoff was born in Queens, New York, in 1938 to a middle-class Jewish family. He wasn't born to wealth or privilege. He had to build his fortune himself from the ground up. In 1960, at age 22, young Bernie Madoff founded his own brokerage firm with money he had saved. He started small, operating from a modest office. He was a market maker, someone who buys and sells stocks, making money on the tiny spread between what he paid and what he sold them for. It was unglamorous work. It was honest. And over 2 decades, his reputation grew steadily. Other brokers began to respect him. His firm grew. By the 1980s, Madoff was already wealthy. He had a successful business. He had money. He had respect. By 1990, he became chairman of NASDAQ, the entire stock exchange. This was extraordinary. NASDAQ had revolutionized how stocks were traded in America. And Bernie Madoff, the kid from Queens, was now leading that revolution. To be NASDAQ's chairman meant you were trusted by the most important people in American finance. It meant regulators knew your name. It meant your integrity was beyond question. And it meant you had a shield, a reputation so stellar that it protected you from scrutiny. By the 1990s, Madoff was legendary on Wall Street. Month after month, year after year, through bull markets and bear markets, through recessions and booms, Bernie Madoff delivered consistent returns. 1% every single month, 12% per year, reliably, without fail. In an industry where investors celebrate 8 to 10% annual returns as excellent, Madoff was in a league of his own. His client list was exclusive and impressive. Hollywood actors, athletes, Holocaust survivor organizations, prestigious charities. The minimum investment was $1 million. This kept the fund exclusive and made people feel special, admitted to an elite club. To his clients, Bernie Madoff wasn't just a fund manager. He was a financial sage, a trusted advisor, someone you didn't question because the results spoke for themselves. The reality, of course, was something else entirely. While Madoff's legitimate market-making business was real and profitable, he had constructed something far larger and far more sinister in the shadows. A false reality, a Ponzi scheme of almost incomprehensible scale. But in 2008, to the world, Bernie Madoff was untouchable. He was a legend. He was proof that intelligence, hard work, and integrity could make you wealthy. He was also a liar. The betrayal didn't start with a grand plan. It started with a single mistake. In the early 1970s, Madoff made a bad trade. He lost significant money on a stock position. Rather than admit the error, rather than take the loss like any honest trader, he made a fateful decision. He fabricated fake trades to cover it up. 1 lie became 2. 2 became 10. 10 became 100. Over time, what began as a cover-up transformed into a parallel business. Madoff created a secret investment account, separate from his legitimate market-making business. Wealthy investors deposited millions into this account, billions, eventually. They thought their money was being invested in something called convertible bond arbitrage. It was a complex, sophisticated, apparently highly profitable investment technique. It sounded technical. It sounded legitimate. They sent him their millions. But Madoff wasn't investing their money in the market. He was using new deposits from new investors to pay returns to older investors. This is Ponzi scheme mechanics, the oldest con in finance, named after Charles Ponzi, who ran a similar scheme in Boston in 1920. As long as new money flows in, everyone's statements look good. Everyone's happy. But the moment redemptions exceed new deposits, the structure collapses. There's nowhere left to hide. And somehow, Bernie Madoff kept it running for nearly 40 years. He had strategy. He kept his client list limited, fewer people to manage, fewer questions asked. Wealthy investors trust their own judgment. If something were truly wrong, surely someone smarter would have caught it by now. He had a cover story. Convertible bond arbitrage sounded technical, sophisticated, complicated. Opacity was itself a shield. Complex strategies invite less questioning than simple ones. He had Annette Bongiorno. Bongiorno was brilliant at one task. She created fake statements every month. She would read the Wall Street Journal, identify stocks that had gone up significantly, then work backward, retroactively assigning them to Madoff's portfolio as if he'd bought them months earlier. The statements looked official. They were notarized. They were complete fabrications. David Kugel and Frank D. Pasquale were accomplices too. They all knew the truth. They all profited handsomely. Kugel lived in gated communities. D. Pasquale received millions in bonuses. Bongiorno earned a comfortable living. They were guilty. They were enriched. But they also had protection. As long as Bernie Madoff was untouchable, so were they. In 2005, a Boston investment professional named Harry Markopolos became suspicious. He analyzed Madoff's returns mathematically. They were impossible. Madoff would have to be the greatest investor of all time, so vastly superior that it violated the laws of probability. Markopolos compiled a 17-page report listing 30 red flags. He sent it to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Investigate Bernie Madoff immediately. The SEC investigated. They looked at his records. They reviewed his operations. Then they closed the case. How was that possible? Bernie Madoff's reputation was invincible. He was too famous, too connected, too respected. The idea that he could be a fraud wasn't just wrong, it was insulting. How could you accuse the chairman of NASDAQ of being a common con artist? The best con is the one people don't want to believe is happening. And Bernie Madoff's con was so grand, so audacious, that nobody could bring themselves to believe it. For nearly 40 years, the scheme held. Then, in late 2008, everything changed. The financial crisis hit. Banks failed. The stock market fell like a stone. Suddenly, all of Madoff's investors wanted their money back. This is a Ponzi scheme's vulnerability. When people get scared, they panic. They want their cash. They want safety. In September and October 2008, redemption requests poured in. Not thousands of dollars, billions of dollars. Madoff's investors wanted to withdraw $1.5 billion. But Madoff didn't have $1.5 billion in actual cash. He had about $300 million, being depleted by operating costs. A Ponzi scheme can survive indefinitely as long as new money flows in. But when more people want to withdraw than new deposits arrive, the structure collapses. There's nowhere left to hide. On December 3, 2008, Bernie Madoff sat down with Frank D. Pasquale and spoke 5 words that would end everything. I'm out of money. What's remarkable is that Madoff tried to maintain appearances even in that moment. A week later, he held his annual Christmas party, distributing bonuses to employees as if nothing was wrong. But his sons noticed something was profoundly wrong. On December 9th, they confronted him directly and asked a simple question. Are you running a Ponzi scheme? And Bernie Madoff, after 40 years of lies, finally told the truth. Yes, I'm running a Ponzi scheme. We're out of money. That was the moment. The 40-year lie ended. Not to external investigation, not to regulatory scrutiny, but to simple mathematics. The scheme had run out of money. His sons immediately called a lawyer. The lawyer called the authorities. By December 11th, FBI agents appeared at Madoff's apartment. "There is no innocent explanation," Madoff said. "I've been running a massive Ponzi scheme." He was arrested that day. His assets were frozen. His offices were sealed. The scheme that had consumed 40 years of his life was over. And now came the reckoning. The victims started coming forward. Retirees who had watched their pensions disappear. Holocaust survivors who had already lost so much in their lives, now learning that their insurance against future loss had been an illusion. Families that had planned their retirement around Madoff's returns now had nothing. Some lost their homes. Some took their own lives. One woman, a retired teacher, had deposited her life savings with Madoff. She had saved carefully over her career. She had done everything right. She had trusted the most respected name on Wall Street. And when the scheme collapsed, she found herself living in a homeless shelter. As investigators tallied the numbers, the scale became clear. Madoff had stolen approximately $17 to $20 billion in actual cash. At its peak, his fake portfolio was worth $65 billion on paper. There were roughly 15,000 victims, celebrities and politicians, charity foundations and Holocaust survivor organizations, universities, prestigious charities, and ordinary people who had simply wanted their money to grow safely. This wasn't subtle white-collar crime. This was systematic. This was deliberate. This was sustained over 40 years with cold calculation. In the weeks after his arrest, everyone wanted to understand the same thing. Why? Bernie Madoff was already a billionaire. He had money. He had status. He had achieved the American dream. So, what compelled him to continue? The answer begins with a single lie. One bad trade in the 1970s. He lost money. Instead of accepting the loss, he fabricated fake trades to cover it up. One lie became two. Two became 10. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The lie became an addiction. The psychology of a con artist often reveals someone with a deep need for control, for superiority, for admiration. Madoff had all of those. But he also had something else. He was trapped. After the first lie, he couldn't undo it. After the 10th lie, confession was impossible. After 40 years of lies, 40 years of building on that initial deception, how could he admit he wasn't a genius? How could he destroy his reputation, his family's respect, his legacy?
So he kept going.
The lies compounded, the stakes escalated, and the adrenaline became addictive. Every month that passed without discovery was another victory. Every new client turned away because the fund was closed to new investors reinforced his sense of power, his exclusivity, his superiority. He was running the most audacious con in history.
He was fooling the smartest people in finance.
He was getting away with something extraordinary, and nobody could catch him. The SEC couldn't catch him. The financial industry couldn't catch him. His own investors couldn't catch him, even though they were smart, wealthy, and had access to the best financial advice money could buy. Madoff was living in the adrenaline high of an impossible crime. But there's something darker. He never seemed to develop genuine remorse. Even in prison, even in interviews with psychiatrists and journalists, Madoff spoke about his crime with curious detachment. He accepted legal responsibility. He acknowledged the facts. He admitted to the crime. But the moral weight of what he had done never seemed to penetrate his conscience. It never seemed to land. He would say things like, "I was just trying to survive." As if 40 years of stealing from thousands of people, 40 years of destroying lives, was simply a survival mechanism. It was a rationalization so incomplete, so disconnected from the reality of his crime, that it was almost tragic in its inadequacy. He had stolen billions. He had destroyed retirement savings. He had driven some to suicide. He had homeless teachers because of him. He had eviscerated charitable organizations. And his explanation was, "I was trying to survive." When you compare Madoff's crime to other white-collar frauds, Enron, WorldCom. What stands out is the duration. Enron's fraud lasted a few years. WorldCom's lasted a handful of years. Madoff kept his scheme running for nearly 40 years. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a deliberate, sustained, calculated decision to steal from thousands of people every single day for 4 decades. By the time Madoff was arrested, he was 70 years old. He had spent more than half his adult life running a criminal enterprise. The normal arc of a con artist is that they eventually get reckless and get caught. Madoff somehow resisted that. He was meticulous. He was careful. It's quite possible he could have continued indefinitely. It wasn't his own hubris that ended the scheme. It was something entirely external, the financial crisis of 2008. A force he couldn't control. A moment when the entire financial system seemed on the verge of collapse, and his investors suddenly demanded their money back. In that moment, after 40 years in shadow, Bernie Madoff's greatest con, the con of his own reputation, finally failed. Bernie Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison, life without parole, given his age. He died in prison in April 2021, at 82, never having tasted freedom again. The government established a victim compensation fund that eventually recovered and returned approximately $14 billion to those who had lost money. It wasn't full restitution. Many victims never recovered more than a fraction of what they had invested. The teacher who ended up in a homeless shelter didn't get her full pension back. Many Holocaust survivor organizations never fully recovered. But the financial reckoning was almost the least important consequence. The psychological aftermath was far more profound. Thousands of people had to reckon with a difficult truth. They had been fooled. Not by a con artist operating in shadows, but by one of the most respected names on Wall Street. By a man they trusted. By a man who had seemed, for all appearances, to be trustworthy. Retirees who had based their entire financial security on Madoff's returns had to start over from nothing at an age when starting over was almost impossible. Families learned a bitter lesson. Trust, no matter how well-placed it seems, is fragile. The Madoff scandal exposed cracks in the American financial system. It revealed that the SEC was understaffed, under-resourced, and perhaps too deferential to powerful figures. It showed that reputation, no matter how carefully cultivated, can mask criminality. The scandal deepened cynicism about Wall Street that had been building for years. It made people ask harder questions about their own investments. And it raised a difficult question that persists even today. If Bernie Madoff could fool the entire financial industry for 40 years, what else are we not seeing? What other frauds are happening right now hidden behind respectable names? The Madoff scandal didn't just devastate thousands of individual lives. It shook faith in the institutions that are supposed to protect us. The SEC failed. The auditors failed. The financial industry failed. The system itself failed to catch him, even when warning signs were explicitly presented. And that damage, measured in lost trust and shattered confidence, might be even greater than the billions that disappeared. Bernie Madoff's story is a story of betrayal of a particular kind. It wasn't violent. It wasn't dramatic. There were no weapons, no kidnappings, no sudden violence. It was betrayal through trust. Betrayal through the systematic exploitation of reputation. Betrayal by someone who understood human psychology well enough to weaponize it. Madoff succeeded because he understood something fundamental. People want to believe. We desperately want to believe that experts know what they're doing. We want to believe that someone with a reputation as celebrated as Bernie Madoff couldn't possibly be lying to us. We want to believe that if something were really wrong, surely someone smarter would have caught it. He exploited those beliefs systematically for 40 years. But there's another dimension to Madoff's betrayal that deserves careful reflection. He didn't steal from people he didn't know. He stole from people who believed in him. People who recommended him to their friends and family. People who, in some cases, became his friends. That intimacy made the betrayal infinitely worse. It wasn't abstract theft from a distant institution. It was personal betrayal. It was coming home to find that the person you had invited into your life, the person you had trusted with your financial security, the person you had believed in, was stealing from you every single day. In the end, Bernie Madoff wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a man who made one bad decision, to lie about a bad trade, and then spent 4 decades trapped by that decision, perpetuating the lie, deepening the crime, and, in the process, destroying thousands of lives. The tragedy isn't just the money that disappeared. It isn't just the retirement savings that evaporated. It's that the truth, when it finally did emerge, was so ordinary, so mundane, so disappointing in its simplicity. No grand conspiracy, no financial genius, just a man who couldn't admit he was wrong, and a system that trusted him too much to question him. And perhaps most importantly, the victims, the people who were fooled, who lost their savings, who had to start over, were not stupid or careless. They were people who trusted the wrong person, which, in a world that requires trust, is something that can happen to anyone. Because sometimes, the greatest betrayals aren't the ones that are hardest to commit. They're the ones that are hardest to believe.